Mayor, it's great to be in Blacksburg. Senator Edwards, thank you for being here. All the other officials and candidates who are here, and thank you, Senator, for what you said. I was sitting here looking at you thinking, I wish I were your age. I'd like to see what's going to happen. And I looked out there and I saw my high school classmate in 1964, 49 years ago in high school in Arkansas, and they're a wonderful husband. And here's why I say that. We live in what might be, and should be, the most exciting age of peace, prosperity, and progress in history. I spent $3 billion of your money when I was president to sequence the human genome. We have now gotten $184 billion worth of economic benefit from that $3 billion investment. It now costs, let's take, for example, at the largest children's cancer center in America, St. Jude in Memphis, it now costs $5,000 to sequence the human genome. And it is saving lots of lives, the ability to do that. Soon it will be at 1,000, soon it will be at 500. We are now learning things that will help us to deal with Alzheimer's and various kinds of cancers. We've already identified the genetic markers that are high predictors of breast cancer, so that most women can wait till 50 to have annual mammograms, and women who have the markers can start when they're 25. And pretty soon, nanotechnology, which I spent $500 million of your money to start the research on, will allow us to walk into canisters 4 times a year and be scanned, and we will find tumors that are submicroscopic, so that those of you who are undergraduates here, I'll make you a prediction. Within 15 years, people will be arguing most profoundly about whether it is time to take the tumor out or not, because most cancers are disposed of in the normal course of our own body's operations. It should be an amazing time. But there's a global shortage of jobs, especially among the young, compounded in America by the shortage of good jobs for non-college educated, middle-aged people who lost their jobs during the financial meltdown, but still need to work 10 or 20 more years in order to provide for themselves and avoid imposing a great burden on their families. After inflation, median family income, the one in the middle, is lower than it was the day I left office. And we had, for the first time since the late 70s, for about the last 6 years I was president, incomes going up in every quintile, that is every 20% break of the American society, almost exactly the same. We had the highest median income ever recorded, the lowest poverty rate in more than 30 years, the lowest poverty rate among African Americans and Latinos ever recorded. We were moving together. Now we're moving apart. So the real issue before the country and before Virginia is, how do we take advantage of all the good things that are happening and deal with the challenges? And who's most likely to do that? There are very few states in the country better positioned for the future because of the high-tech base you have here, because of the investments that have been made in defense and related enterprises here, because of the university network you have here. You're well positioned for the future because you do have, as Terry said, really good network of community colleges which are highly flexible, open to everybody, and changing all the time as the changing economic demands of the regions change. I have worked my whole adult life, it seems like, certainly in the years I was president and since, to try to create a country and a world of shared opportunities and shared responsibilities, where we're all part of one community. where our differences are important and certainly make life more interesting and help us get to better conclusions, but our common humanity matters more. So we now have this governor's race, which is very interesting to me. First, Virginia is great at self-promotion, deciding to have, along with New Jersey, the only two governor's races in the country the year after the presidential race, guarantees you a lot of attention. You might as well go around with neon lights in your head. And now you have two, how shall I say it, extremely interesting candidates that are wildly different. And I came here to campaign for one. I came here for three reasons. One is personal. Terry McAuliffe and his wife and his 5 children are friends of Hillary's and mine. And when Chelsea was somewhat younger and still fooling around with her parents, we went on vacation together. We have spent endless nights talking the night away together. He's a good person. And he is someone who was heavily involved in politics, never ran before he got interested in becoming governor of Virginia, but cared profoundly about the issues and how we were going to take advantage of our opportunities and beat back our problems. I love the guy. I'd be here, as I said yesterday, if he were 50 points behind the polls, I'd be, because he's my friend, and I believe he'd be a good governor. But I'll make you a prediction. If you do what you should do, he will win, and then a year from now, he'll be so popular, half the people who vote against him will wonder what in the wide world they were thinking about. This election is about 2 different approaches and very specific proposals. Now, if you believe we live in an interdependent world, which means we can't escape each other, that's all it means. Interdependence means divorce is not an option. It doesn't tell you what kind of interdependence. Are we going to build a happy home in Virginia? Or are we going to fight all the time? Are the opportunities going to predominate, or are the problems going to predominate? All over the world, this is the question being faced, and all over the world there are 2 different political approaches being adopted. There are some people who say, hey, we got to share the future, so we need to cooperate in figuring out how to forge the future. Wherever creative cooperation is being employed in America and around the world, things are working. The other side said, gosh, we're all rubbing up against these people we don't agree with, they don't look like us, they don't think like us, and everything we think is right is being threatened. So we want to have constant conflict to prove we're always right, we know the answer to everything, and we're going to beat the living daylights out of anybody that doesn't agree with it. In the case of Republicans, as Lieutenant Governor Bolden said, even people in their own party, they want to beat the living daylights out of they don't agree. So this is important to me. Look, I'm proud to be a Democrat, but I think 2 parties are good. I think a vigorous independent movement is good. Nobody is right all the time. A few years ago, a man named James Surowiecki wrote a book which was called The Genius of Crowds, or something like The Wisdom of Crowds. And the point of the book was, I'll summarize it by an example. If we could do an instantaneous IQ check in this room, and the person with the highest IQ were selected, and then we put that person off in one room, and all the rest of us stayed here. They brought in coffee and donuts or whatever to keep them halfway lucid. And then for 3 days, 20 problems were fed into both rooms. They required solutions, 20 problems. Over time, we would make better decisions than the genius alone in the room. Why? Because there are a lot of things to wisdom beyond IQ, and because complex problems require different perspectives. Therefore, we should be embracing a cooperation model, not a conflict model. Consider the recent government shutdown. And And the threat, by the way, not to raise this nation's debt limit. That is, not to pay for debts we've already run up. Yesterday, Terry and I went to a Red Lobster. And, you know, I try to follow a different diet now, but I still eat those biscuits. I got 60% of my daily calories from half a biscuit. It was a good You like me going in there and ordering lunch, paying for it with a credit card, and then when the credit card bill comes to my house, I said, you know, I decided that meal wasn't quite as good as I thought. I don't believe I'll pay the credit card now. Now you're laughing, but that's what it means not to raise the debt limit. There's something funny about a guy who says Medicaid is welfare under the health care law. We shouldn't give it to people. And then when they show up and they don't have any money at the emergency room to get health care when they're sicker than they ought to be, if they can't pay there, you fingerprint them. But if you're in Congress and you vote not to pay the debts we've already run up, they don't fingerprint you, they say you're a hero. Which is the second point I want to make. The difference in the cooperators and the people oriented toward conflict is that we really do think we should all live under the same set of rules.
Yes.
They don't agree with that. You all clapped when Terry said he wanted to protect the voting rights in Virginia.
Yeah.
You consider what the choice is. He will do that. He will make it easier for people to cast honest votes. Look what happened in North Carolina and Texas to students. See if you want to hear. Now in Texas, you got to have a photo ID issued by the state. The Tea Party crowd in control in Texas admitted that the average low-income working Hispanic would have to spend a huge amount of time in the car, would have to drive 100 miles, 50 miles each way on average, if they live south of San Antonio to get one of these IDs. And he said, well, we're used to it. It's a big state. If you make the minimum wage, you've got to watch every dollar you spend, and you have to work every day or you'll get fired. That's a big deal to ask somebody to drive 100 miles just to be able to vote. Then there was the remarkable wrinkle in the photo ID. You have to have a state-issued photo ID, 2 exceptions only. If your state-issued photo ID comes from the state university, it doesn't count.
What? That ain't right.
And if you have a concealed carry permit, you don't need a photo. Now, of course, this has nothing to do with the likely political preferences of students and people with concealed carry permits. Over in North Carolina, closer to home, used to be the gem of the Southeast in terms of the blizzard of fine institutions of higher education in North Carolina, and everybody wanting them, and most North Carolina kids wanted to stay in the state and go to one of the schools. It's a long state, right?
It really is, though. It really is.
So North Carolina has a state income tax. And like the federal income tax, you can deduct your children, right? Not anymore, you can't. If they're in college, you can't deduct your kids. If they register and vote where they go to college, they have to come home to vote, or you lose your deduction. Now, this has nothing to do with the likely voting patterns of university students and college students. I'm telling you, folks, if you want us all to live under one set of rules, you better vote for Terry McAuliffe. And he's right about this Medicaid money. Look, the computer problems are frustrating and disappointing, but they'll get fixed. People would have short memories. When President Bush sponsored the Medicare drug program for seniors, they had huge computer problems when they introduced it. It was so bad that some seniors actually were told by the computer when they came to their neighborhood pharmacy that they had lost the coverage that they had before the bill passed, and were in danger of not being able to get life-sustaining medicine, and the community pharmacists basically took a deep breath and went ahead and made the most of it until they got everything fixed up. And our party, even though most of our people voted against it because it wasn't paid for and they didn't think that we bargained hard enough for lower prices, they still tried to help all the constituents make the most of it and help people solve it. They weren't sitting around rooting for it to fail. So when you hear people say, for example, all these people that are we can't participate in this Medicaid expansion because all those people are on welfare. First of all, you need to know something. That is not true. The people who are unemployed on public assistance are already on Medicaid. They don't need the expansion. The expansion covers people who are working for nickels and dimes, minimum wage, with an income of 100 to 133% of the federal poverty level. We ought to be praising those people. We ought to be thanking God for those people that in spite of all the problems they face, they get up every morning and go to work even though they don't make enough money. That's the money that makes it possible for people to go to the emergency room and be able to pay. That's the money that keeps these hospitals from being weighed down by uncompensated care. You're going to create an enormous amount of problems for Virginia if you make an ideological decision here instead of a practical, cooperating decision to participate in it. And as Terry said, you've already sent your tax money to Washington. You ought to get a fair share back and participate in this and be a part of it. So, the final thing I want to say about this is this. I was a governor for 12 years. And I loved it. But it was tough when I was governor of Arkansas. The middle of the country was just being gutted, first by a farm crisis, and then by manufacturing jobs that literally disappeared. And in those years, we designed a plan to try to reverse it. And we were one of 8 states in America that gained manufacturing jobs in the 1980s, only 8. By 1992, when I ran for president, we led the country in job growth. But we had an unemployment rate above the national average every year until 1992. But we didn't have anything like the assets you have. To start, you have so many assets. Why put them at risk? I have been a governor. I know this. Look, I hope that Washington will start working together. I hope they'll get back on worrying about the economy. They can't get rid of the deficit until we have more economic growth. We cut the deficit in half. We got rid of the deficit that was a result of President Bush's tax cuts on highest income people and the financial crash. The rest of it's due to slow economic growth. We have some long-term challenges because of the aging of the baby boomers, but we can't get rid of it right now until we have some more growth. I hope that'll happen. But whether it does or not, you need a governor who wakes up every day thinking about how to maximize the economic present and future of Virginia. And I'm telling you, it makes a difference. I did the job. I know it makes a difference. And, you know, sometimes Terry's been contrasted with Mr. Cuccinelli unfavorably by saying, oh, he's a deal maker. And I saw what was going on in Washington, and I thought, oh, give me just one. Particularly, you might ought to go home and read the Constitution of the United States tonight. It was organized by practical people who, by the way, at the convention had real fights, down and out arguments, but in the end came to an agreement. They were worried about abuse of power because they all came here from somewhere else with dictatorial power. So they put all these checks and balances into our system. But they wanted to have enough play in the system so it could adapt to new challenges and decisions could be made so America could keep moving into the future. And it has worked for more than 200 years because when push comes to shove, we get together and get the show on the road. The American Constitution might well be subtitled The Art of the Deal. It was fashioned by people in the so-called Age of Reason who believed that we had to get together and make good decisions. And if you look at that, you contrast that to somebody who actually sued a professor here just for investigating climate change because ideologically they have already decided it doesn't exist. And insofar as it does, people didn't cause it. It sort of happened. And therefore, if you violate my ideology, you have committed a cardinal social and political sin, and you're wasting the taxpayers' money trying to prove something I have already decided isn't true. Now, here at Virginia Tech, I'll give you an example. You have the nation's leading research into whether carbon can be captured and either utilized or stored. There are many people on my side of this fight who believe global warming is a terrible problem and it's going to cause calamitous results, who don't support that research because they think the only answer is to make carbon go away. I do support the research because I think it is wrong for us ever to foreclose any options in humanity's evolving struggle. And that's what Terry McAuliffe represents. He will get up every day, make the most of the economic possibilities of the state, keep supporting the higher education infrastructure, the community college infrastructure, the education of the state, and get the show on the road. That's what you have to do. This is not rocket science. And since I'm at a university, I will close with this. The most important book I read last year was a book by the great Nobel Prize winning microbiologist E.O. Wilson, now 90, he was 87 when he wrote this book, called The Social Conquest of Earth. And Wilson goes back to the beginning of life on the planet based on the best historical evidence we have, scientific evidence, when single-cell organisms began to divide. And what's happened since. And he said, if you look at the history of life, you can only conclude that the social conquest of Earth belongs to the great cooperators. Ants, termites, bees, and people. He points out, for example, E.O. Wilson's the first guy that taught me 20 years ago, reading one of his books, that the combined weight of ants on Earth is greater than the combined weight of people on Earth. The termites make air-conditioned homes. That is, they will drill and clear out a space under the ground, and they'll drill 5 holes, but they'll only go in and out of the same one every time. The rest is for air conditioning. They do this without any apparent conscious brain power. Ants will be chased through a forest by a predator, and some of them will go up on the highest blade of grass and sacrifice themselves so that their neighbors can survive. And he said people have way the greatest potential because we have consciousness and a conscience. So we are capable of becoming something wonderful. The big problem is we are prone to arrogance and selfishness, prone to not know what we don't know, prone to think it's okay to take too much of today and not leave enough for tomorrow, prone to think the differences between each other are more important. We now know from human genome research, it's the most important thing I got out of my $3 billion, your $3 billion, that if you look around this room, it's a very diverse crowd, right? Every non-age related difference you can see in this room is rooted in 1/2 of 1% of your human genome. We are otherwise 99.5% the same. We cannot afford, and Virginia cannot afford, to go into the future spending 99.5% of its time worrying about the 0.5% of us that is different. You can't do it. So, it is that the people oriented toward conflict and ideology have over people oriented toward creative cooperation. You know what it is? Politics. Why? Because if you're absolutely convinced you're right, you live in a constant siege mentality, and you develop the ability to convince other people that you're right and scare the living daylights out of them and keep everybody in a constant state of anxiety all the time so that smoke is coming out of their ears instead of light bulbs going off in their buildings. And you know what you get out of that? They always show up to vote. So that's when we got all this political division in America. One America shows up in presidential elections. It's a big, bustling, diverse country that knows we have to work together to forge the future. Then in all other elections, a very different America shows up. It's smaller, more oriented toward yesterday, more oriented toward us and them instead of all of us together. In 2008 and 2012, in the presidential elections, 72% of you showed up. In 2009, when the current governor was elected, 40% of you showed up. A third stayed home. So that's really why we're here today. That's why we're all waving the cards today. Terry McAuliffe has done more than anybody in modern Virginia history tries to close the gap between the presidential elections and the governor's races. And the lieutenant governor and the attorney general's race, also very important. More than 1 million doors have now been knocked on. The goal is to do 600,000 more. If they do 600,000 more than 40% of you will show up 8 days from now.
That's right.
If more than 40% of you show up 8 days from now, Terry McAuliffe will be the next governor of Virginia. Senator North will be lieutenant governor, and Senator Herring will be attorney general, and we can go forward together. And it's all up to you. That's what this is about. I know you're busy, and I know you're thinking about other things, and I know your life has a lot of elements to it, but I am telling you, the decision that you will make in Virginia in 8 days is profoundly important to you and your future and the future of this state. It is also important to America. We have to send a signal that we have chosen creative cooperation over constant conflict. We have to send a signal. We have to send a signal that we want shared prosperity and we're willing to assume shared responsibility. We have to send a signal that we want to be part of the same community, not have one set of rules for one crowd and another set for everybody else. We have to send that signal, and you can do it. Will you do it?
Yes!
Okay. I've got more yesterdays than tomorrows. I'm not running for anything. But I believe what I said before. I wish I were your age. I'd like to hang around and see what's going to happen. Found 20 planets outside our solar system that seem to be enough like Earth that we may not be alone in the universe.
We're not.
But I will settle happy for knowing that you have chosen to share the future, to share its opportunities, to share its responsibilities. And it will start 8 days from now. You will send a huge message to the people of Virginia and the people of America that you want a different future and you want to live it together. Thank you, and God bless you.